much for joining us this morning. We're going to be discussing how literacy programming can help bridge the widening gap in education. And we want to give a special thank you to Volkswagen South Africa for sponsoring this webinar. As you'll hear more about today, Volkswagen has long been committed to driving functional literacy programming. I'm Zayan. I work in the Thought Leadership Division at Trialogue. And to get a sense of who we have on the call today, I'm going to invite you to respond to this poll question to tell us which sector you work in. Let me launch the poll very quickly. So you'll see the poll on your screen. If you can respond to that, we'll give it 30 seconds. And we still have attendees coming into the call, so we may not have an entirely clear idea this early on, but it's good to have a sense. Thank you very much. I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1 and share the results with you. So the majority of people on the call are from the nonprofit sector, and then we have a few corporates and a smaller amount of consultants, academics and other, but we do have a mix on the call. So I'm looking forward to diverse perspectives coming through in both the chat and Q&A box, which I'll tell you how to use in a second. Okay, so just moving on to the next slide, please, Kathy. Great, we're up to 57 participants. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names on the call. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, though, I'm going to take just a brief moment to tell you a little bit about Trialogue. We're one of only a few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business. We do this through advisory and consulting services, as well as through our knowledge sharing platforms, all of which have a vision of making corporate social investment in South Africa more effective. The two main types of consulting that we do are monitoring and evaluation and CSI strategy development. And then on the knowledge sharing platform side of our business, we run an annual conference, which takes place in the first half of the year usually. And we publish an annual business and society handbook, which we invite you to profile your development work in. There are various ways to do that, so you can get in touch if you're interested. And the Trialogue Knowledge Hub is an online body of knowledge that unpacks specific topics in development and is aimed at strengthening the impact of investment in those areas. So you can visit trialogueknowledgehub.co.za to learn more about this topic, in fact, and then a number of others. Just to give you a sense of the running order of the session, on the next slide, please. In terms of the running order, I'm going to briefly underscore literacy as a cornerstone for education. And then we'll hear from 3 panelists who will each bring their unique perspective and experience to the discussion. And then we do invite you to engage with each other. There are 2 ways to engage in the session. The first is to use the chat box, which you'll see there's a little icon for, and there you can really connect with each other and share comments and thinking. But if you have specific questions that are directed at panelists, I'm going to ask you to please use the Q&A box. That's the only box that I'll be referencing to draw questions from when we get to the discussion part of the session. And if you do go to the Q&A box and you see that there are questions that you are particularly interested in, or something you wanted to pose that's already there, then you can vote that question up. So it'll be at the top of the list and it'll grab my attention. This webinar is being recorded and the summary notes will be shared with you next week. We also ask that you kindly stay on the call once we've ended the formal session so that you can give us very quick feedback on how you found the session. The survey will pop up on the screen at the end. Okay, so to start with, there's so much to say about the importance of literacy, of course, and we know that there are many dire stats on the state of education in the country. But perhaps the one that we're most familiar with is the Progress in International Reading and Literacy study from 2016, which may be a bit dated now, but it does remain one of the most scientific studies to date, where 12,810 pupils were tested from 293 schools on the state of reading among grade 4 pupils in South Africa. The study found that almost 8 out of 10, or 78% of children, can't read for meaning. And out of the 50 countries that participated in the study, South Africa came dead last. Illiteracy entrenches social inequality. There are some downright heartbreaking facts about children in low-income homes simply not having the exposure and the access to the opportunities and resources that foster a love of reading. For example, according to the South African Book Development Council, toddlers in families who received welfare benefits have heard 13 million words, compared with the 48 million words that children with parents who have professional jobs have heard by the time they're 3 years old. And our new world places even greater emphasis on critical and imaginative thinking. If we consider the detrimental impact of misinformation about, it's funny, when we were putting the initial content together for the Knowledge Hub topic on literacy, we spoke to the importance of literacy and critical thinking when it comes to combating things like HIV and AIDS. And now, of course, we can apply it to this global pandemic and what misinformation means, for example, for the take-up of the vaccine. And then if we think also about how the world of work is changing, how much happens online, then literacy really seems like the most fundamental imperative to really just take us forward in this new world. We also, of course, know that reading for meaning is crucial for a thriving democracy. And we do annual research, which is featured in the handbook that I mentioned at the start of the session. I just want to take you through the bit of research that applies most directly to literacy. So we know from more than 2 decades of CSI research that the vast majority of companies, 95% who were surveyed last year, in fact, invest in the education sector. And of the 67 companies that responded to the specific question on the subject areas that they support within the sector, 32% supported maths and science, while just 10% supported language and literacy initiatives. But of course, we know that literacy, and more specifically reading for meaning, is a building block for meaningful education outcomes in all subject areas. It really is the entry point for any kind of maths and science education. So I really don't feel like I need to set much more of a scene here. We're all aligned with the importance of literacy and the urgency with which we need to get this right. Before I introduce you to our panelists, I want to invite you to tell us which types of literacy interventions you're involved in. So let me just launch our second poll and ask you to please participate fairly quickly. I'm going to take 30 seconds again. If you can tell us which types of literacy interventions you're involved in, please. I'm going to give it 3 more seconds. Thank you, everyone. I'll share those results now. So the majority of people on the call work in reading programs with learners. And then quite a few on teacher development. And we're very fortunate to be hearing today from Nangamso from Fundawande, an organization that focuses on that. Resource development and provision of resources come in 3rd and 4th. And then awareness campaigns and adult literacy programs, as well as parent and caregiver support, have lower numbers of interventions on the call today, at least. Thank you for sharing. And we will touch on these interventions through the conversation. I'd now like to invite our panelists to turn their cameras on. And if we can just have a quick thank you. Okay, so we've got on the call today with us, we've got Nonqubela Malitsa, who's the Director of Corporate and Government Affairs at Volkswagen South Africa. Nonqubela, can I ask you to turn on your camera, please? Hi, welcome. And then Gail Campbell is the CEO of Zenex Foundation. Gail, thank you for your time this morning. And Angamso Mtsatsi from Fundawande is the recently appointed CEO. So we're excited to hear from her today. Welcome all. And again, thank you for your time. I'm going to firstly, Nonqubela, start with you and invite you to please tell us about Volkswagen South Africa and how it's supported literacy programming to date, as well as how the pandemic has impacted your programming.
Okay, great. Thank you, Zayan, and morning, everybody. Yes, so Volkswagen South African literacy. This is of all our, so Volkswagen, we've been, involved in corporate social investment for about 30 years, but we started with early literacy and functional literacy as a legacy initiative about 5 years ago. And of all the issues that we're involved in, this is the one area that I feel the most passionate about, because I really believe that if we were to really be able to be successful in making sure that all learners in South Africa are able to read and write for meaning by the time they're 10 years old, it would have such a multiplier impact on all other societal ills. Everything, we just heard 2 days ago about, once again, that we have the highest unemployment in the world and the highest youth unemployment in the world. I really believe that the fact that we have such poor educational outcomes and such poor educational outcomes from a literacy point of view, and in the early years is a key driver of that unemployment. And we cannot solve the unemployment crisis and the youth unemployment crisis in Africa without solving the issue of high quality educational output in the first 10 years of life. So it's something that I really feel passionate about, and yet I feel that it's something that we are still so far behind in as a country. So our view as Volkswagen in addressing literacy is to, if one thing that I think we've tried to do is to really take a holistic view of what needs to happen, because addressing literacy is not only about what happens in school, because children only go to school from the time they're 7. So if we want them to be literate and be able to read for meaning by the time they're 10 years old, a lot needs to happen before they get to school. So we've really tried to have an approach that not only that focuses, it starts with parents and caregivers, and in fact with pregnant moms, to try to get them to understand the importance of making sure that, first of all, they are healthy as they carry the child, and that, and they look after themselves, and that as soon as the child is born, that the child is brought up in an environment that is psychologically and physically safe, and they get the right nutrition, and then also that they stimulate and that the child is attended to and loved, because those are you need that for the child to develop optimally. And then for them to read to the child, to talk to the child, and to encourage the child from as soon as the child is born, to encourage the bonding, and also, so because that's where the seeds of literacy and functional literacy, start. So we've had a program, we started off a program that used to go pre-COVID days, because we couldn't do it, as part of the impact of COVID. We had a program that used to have, where people that go to the clinics, to the prenatal clinics, when women go there, and talk to them about the importance, first of all, of reading to your children as soon as they are born, and communicating to them and speaking to them, because that is what promotes early language development. And in order to have functional literacy, you need to have early language development. So that was it starts there, we start there, and then we go to the homes of the caregivers as well, make sure that they have the resources, the appropriate books and materials at the right times. And then we also work in communities. We had a program that encouraged working with Nalibali to promote reading in, using community gogos and whatever to encourage reading and telling stories at home to children, to get into that tradition of talking and early reading and reading for fun and enjoyment before you get to school. So that children are familiar with books, and love books already, to inculcate that love of reading. And then in school, of course, when it's school, what is most important is what happens in the classroom. So what happens in the classroom, we then had to work with teachers, to develop both the teachers' capabilities in terms of teaching reading, in terms of the appropriate use of resources and materials. And then we also worked with organizations like Shine, where we set up in the early phase of our program. We set up in the schools that we work in Shine classrooms, which were classrooms that were out, a special intervention outside of the classroom, where children that were particularly at risk used to go to get the personal intervention and personal guidance from literacy ambassadors. So we also started training and trying to promote the love of teaching, working with unemployed graduates, training them, working in partnership with CSD, the Center for Social Development at Rose University, training these literacy ambassadors in emergent literacy and the basics of literacy. So what I'm trying to say is we've just had a multidisciplinary, holistic approach, starting preschool, at home, in the classroom, and working with teachers, obviously, because in the classroom, the teachers is the most pivotal and the most catalytic instrument for driving literacy, but also really trying to get parents to be advocates and to be champions of reading for their children, and to, encourage their children to read and to promote this as well. And then in terms of, the other things that we've done, so I could talk a lot about all of our interventions, but I think the key message is that we really try to be holistic about it and not just focus on one aspect of it, and know that it's a continuum, and there are many, there are multiple aspects of it that need to be attended to. And then, COVID has really been has had a very negative impact on our programs. Firstly, because children were not able now to attend the programs, not able to go to school. And then, like I said before, the issues of hunger and nutrition has had a very negative impact on our programming. Lack of, the successes that we've seen in our program is there's a very high correlation with the more children attend school, the more children go attend these programs, the Shine centers, the better, the more they improve. We've seen the best results in that regard. So when children are not able to go to school because of rotational schooling and all of that, that's had a negative impact. And also, children have suffered from poverty and unemployment and all of that. And also some mental health issues with lots of depression and all of that. That's also had an impact. But also, we've also seen kind of a regression in terms of now that when the children came back to school, the teachers were now saying, we need to focus more on maths, and we don't have time now to focus on teaching you how to read. We need to do more maths, because I think that's what the Department of Education was focusing on. So spending less time on promoting and working on the basics to promote functional literacy and trying to do other curriculum issues. That's also been a negative impact. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nonkobela, and thank you for speaking so comprehensively to your holistic programming. It really is, you tell a really comprehensive story of how you're touching on all the key stakeholders in ensuring functional literacy by 10. So thank you. I do want to pick up on the challenges through the pandemic in the discussion, so we will continue with that. But let's pass on to Gail Campbell from Xenix Foundation. Gail, can I invite you to turn your camera back on? Thank you. Gail, can you share with us how Xenix supports literacy, reading, and language skills in early grades? And then also, what is Xenix doing to address the backlog and the widening gap in literacy that's been created by the pandemic?
Thanks, Sean, and good morning to everyone who's on the webinar. Xenix has been involved with literacy and language since its inception, and that's 25 years ago. And we've partnered with some excellent nonprofit organizations, and I'm pleased to see the turnout of nonprofit organizations and researchers. And for us, it's been a learning journey. And we've used our research and our monitoring and evaluation to actually guide us on this literacy journey. I mean, our work in literacy has always had three strands or three pillars. The one is interventions that we do at school level. The second pillar is materials development, resource development. And the third pillar is research. And I'm going to give a quick overview of these pillars. And my colleague, Tabi Zuma, is on the webinar, and she'll post some links if you want to find out more. So in interventions, we do three types. The first is when we don't have a lot of knowledge in a particular area, we pilot. And one we're doing now with Wits University is looking at group guided reading and alternatives to that, because it's the one area we found through our other interventions that teachers are grappling with. The second is when we want to develop proof of concept and evidence. And this is work we're doing currently with the DBE and UNICEF. And it's really around coaching and how the HOD in the foundation phase can play a role with coaching. And then we work with governments at large scale and large scope projects. And this we've done through NECT, and we've worked in KZN, and recently going to started working on a project in Mpumalanga. So those are school interventions. The core person we're working with is the teacher, and then the HOD is also a teacher, but head of department. Materials development, the second pillar, our focus has largely been on the development of resources in African languages. And Zayan, at the beginning, you spoke about the stats and access to books that children have at home. And we've got a project underway, Uwazi Letu, and this is going to provide graded readers for teachers to use and leisure readers in the home. The second area that we've done in materials is we've worked with NECT on lesson plans in all 9 African languages. These have been piloted, and they're a guide to teachers around teaching literacy. Research, of course, we've always got our M&E of our interventions so that we're learning as we're doing. And then we do particular research projects, and one that's of interest, and Funda Wanda's partnering also in this one, is looking at developing benchmarks for teaching of African language literacy. And the best way I can explain it is if you're learning in English, there's benchmarks about how many words you need to know by the end of grade 1, the number of books you need to read. So this is really an area that needs development in African languages. On recovery, and perhaps I should say, first of all, and you mentioned, we've always had a situation of learning backlogs in the system. The time loss during COVID has led to increased learning losses, and the two compound each other, you know. And in speaking to teachers, in speaking to our partners, NGOs who work with teachers, teachers are actually talking about children coming back with huge losses around what they've learned in previous grades. And even though we have a revised curriculum per grade, teachers are having to go back and cover concepts from earlier grades. So we are actually in the process of initiating a foundation phase recovery program in 80 schools, and it's going to focus on teacher support. And interestingly, for the first time, we're moving out of the school environment, and we're also going to look at psychosocial support and how to draw parents, caregivers into supporting learners at home. Thanks, Ayan.
Thank you so much, Gail. And what an important note to end on. I think the psychosocial support aspect is such an important one that we really have been picking up in really every conversation we've been having the last year and a bit. Thank you, Gail. I want to remind everyone to please put their questions into the Q&A box rather than into the chat box. And then also in the chat box, when you do pop a comment in there, make sure that you're making it accessible for everyone on the call rather than just panelists and the host. There is that option. Okay. Nangamso, I'm going to now hand over to you. Funda Wande capacitates teachers to teach children in grades R to 3 how to read for meaning and to calculate with confidence. Please, can you comment on your organizational approach and tell us why literacy and numeracy are so closely linked?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Ayan, and good morning to everyone that is joining the conversation this morning. So like you said, sort of our main or underpinning thing that we're trying to do at Funda Wande is to support and train teachers on how to teach reading for meaning, and as well as calculate or teach kids how to calculate with confidence. So a way in which we look at this is what we call or frame as investments of successful structured programs as a pathway to scale. And in that way, we look at various of, or we look at it at various of components that will enable an investment for successful structured program. The first one is government leadership. The second one is evidence-based. The third one is implementation design and experimenting with different types of models. At Funda Wande, we have 3 types of models. There's a coaching arm, there's TAs, and there's a subject advisor intervention in the Western Cape. And the fourth sort of component is materials development, free open access materials. And the fifth one is teacher training and development. And of course, the last one is teacher support. So that's basically our approach in our intervention and programs, and it's what we define as sort of proof of concept for scalable models. Now, the link between literacy and numeracy in the work that we do. So we initially started off in Eastern Cape with just a literacy coaching arm in 2019. And after a year of intervention, and when the evaluation came back by an independent evaluators, the feedback from the teachers said, "Hey, it's great that we've got a literacy program and support in literacy, but we also teach maths, we also teach life skills, and we also teach EFA, and all of these are an issue, or they struggle teaching with." So although initially Funda Wande hadn't planned to delve into the numeracy space, but because of the need and the demand, and probably if you compare literacy and numeracy, there's a whole lot more interventions in literacy rather than in numeracy. So then we introduced a sort of a numeracy arm. And in fact, this year, where we're piloting in all the 3 provinces, we have an integrated literacy and life skills workbook or program, and plus numeracy. So out of the 4 learning areas that foundation-based teachers that are recipients, we cover 3 of the curriculum subject areas. So, I mean, I think Nongubela mentioned this earlier on around how reading is the basis for many other things. And we all know this, that you need to be able to read, to do science, to do maths, to do robotics. So these are, and in fact, holistically, these components, literacy and life skills, in our views, provide some critical foundational skills and particularly in those early developmental years that will then enable kids to do the maths, to do the history, and so on. So, and I think most importantly is that we had to come to a realization as an organization from reflection of and feedback from of our evaluation reports is that we are working with the same teacher. So trying to maximize opportunities to support, to train in order to shift learning outcomes is one that we're currently experimenting with. Now, on the COVID, sort of how our organization, how has COVID impacted the work that we are doing and how we've responded to that. So we actually did we collected data in our schools in Eastern Cape, in our RCT, that is in Eastern Cape, and we'd find that at the time of the data collection, which was end of last year, the learners had only attended 40% of the school year. And when we compared the intervention, so the intervention learners versus the controlled learners, we find that in the control schools, the learning losses were between 57 to about 70%. And that in our schools in particularly, it was the learners that were performing the lowest that had suffered the most learning losses. So although there has not been an improvement in the schools that we're working in, even though we are trying to mitigate for the school closures in forms of at-home learning programs, at-home workbooks for learners and parents, it seems like there hasn't been any significant gains from 2020 to 2021. Now, there's a lot of work and research that is undergoing, that is and like Gail mentioned as well. And there's also a report that was written by Professor Kelly Adderton at UCT that looks at these learning losses and also included the EGRS cohort. So, I mean, it was quite clear, and I think this is one that we can all acknowledge of the greater gap, like Gail mentioned, of the school closure, which has created in the system. And how we've responded that as an organization is basically, we had to come to a realization that it is not business as usual. And we cannot operate like it's business as usual. We would love to, but if this is not immediately addressed, targetedly addressed, these gaps will only further be apart. So we are currently implementing in the 3 provinces that we're working in, which is Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and Limpopo, an accelerated targeted program. And this program basically is structured in a way to be able to give opportunities for teachers, opportunities and as well as support to teachers to basically catch up their learners of all the learning losses that has occurred up until this year. Now, the reality is a month is too short, right? So at the moment, we are piloting this for a month. We are doing our own M&E to try and see whether how effective is this accelerated program. But my hunch tells me that we probably need more than a month. And I think what would be very interesting or very helpful in the sector is, like Gail, I think Gail mentioned sort of Zenix, looking to piloting a catch-up program. And I think the more we can build evidence or have more programs that show evidence, proof of concept, or what are the best practices, what are the best models, not only just to catch up in a sense, but also models that can provide pathways to scale. So in a nutshell, Zion, that's what we're doing at Fonowande, and that's how we've currently responded to the learning losses.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think definitely let's pick up on the recovery programming that both Zenix and you have spoken to, Nangam. So thanks very much for sharing that. I do want to dip into the Q&A box now. Thank you for sharing your questions to the 3 attendees who have. I'm going to start with Nolutanda's question that's directed to Nonkubela from Volkswagen South Africa. Thank you, Nkobela. And yeah, at this point, we've got all the speakers on camera. So if you do want to jump in and respond to something that's directed at someone, you're more than welcome. Nkobela, Noluthando asks whether VW interventions promote African language literacy. We've already, and I think Gail touched on the multilingual resource development. And Noluthando asks, if you haven't looked at the multilingual, what are the obstacles you've experienced in this area of literacy development?
No, our program is now focusing on Xhosa. It's because we are working in Gariga, what is now Gariga, in schools only in Gariga, which is surrounding our plant. In the first 2 years when we started our literacy initiative, we were working on promoting literacy in English. But we very, like Gail said, this has also been a learning journey for us because we are not literacy experts. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing, but we thought at the time that the best thing to do was to promote literacy in English because children anyway have to convert to English in grade 4 and do the rest of their studies in English. But we very soon learned that the best way to promote and to learn to be literate is by first being functionally literate in your own mother tongue. And I mean, there are numerous international studies that prove this. And so then we changed our program to being a Xhosa literacy program. So our whole program is now about promoting functional literacy by the time the children are 10 years old in isiXhosa, because that's where we work.
Thank you, Nkobela. I am going to move quite swiftly through these to make sure we respond to as many as possible. So Gail, Dorothy has asked about NGOs, of course, need to show their proof of impact. You've spoken quite a bit to evaluation already. And so she asks, evaluating reading improvement is not as easy as it would be with maths, and whether you have tools, example, pre-tests or post-tests, that you use that you could possibly speak to and even possibly share. I want to start with Gail and possibly Nganso, you'd like to add to that as well.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dorothy. I mean, first, I just to make the comments around funders supporting NGOs to do some of the M&E work around their interventions. That's critically important. There is the early grade reading assessment, and it's now available in all languages, and the DBE uses this. But I would say when we're looking at literacy, it's a little bit more than tests. I think we want to look at, and I'm sure Fundawanda Evaluation is also doing this, you want to look at firstly, how the program's being delivered. You also want to look at the take-up by teachers, what changes in the classroom. And then you want to look at, well, has this changed learner performance in literacy? And often it's not a quick fix. And I mean, we've even found in 3 years you get gains, and internationally they're talking about us working in schools for much longer than 3 years to constantly improve on learner performance scores.
Thank you very much, Gail. Nganso, would you like to add to that? Because I think the M&E question is an important one.
Sure, but yeah, so I also think that Gail has pretty much hit the nail on the head on that one. And I think as much as, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that as much as M&E is often seen, or the view is that it's a checklist exercise that either donors or whoever can hold someone accountable. But I think there's a further, I mean, one, that's a myth. But also I think that importantly is that how organizations, interventions programs use this information to iterate, one, to learn and get feedback on their interventions in order to be able to iterate, tweak when you need to tweak, and so on. So just like how, teachers, we say, you must use assessments to inform your instructions. Likewise with M&E, we use M&E to enable us or to get information of what's working well, what's not working, where to change things, and not just only as sort of an endpoint measurement of the learner outcomes or the learner performance. So that's the only thing I would add to Gail's point, but yeah.
Thank you very much. Katie Hudson asks so she's directing it at all panelists. Nangamso, can we stay with you possibly? What do you see as the biggest gaps in a holistic approach to ensuring that children can read for meaning? What is civil society missing? And what are the biggest untapped opportunities?
So I think if I'm understanding holistic approach as sort of reading across curriculum as another term, I'm not, I would say in South Africa, at least the research that we have, I'm not aware of any sort of programs that actually does tap into sort of a more of a holistic or reading across curriculum sort of design. You see that a lot in the States. But also, yet again, we need to take a look at context. So I think what we're trying to experiment with an integrated life skills and literacy workbook is to find these ways of how do you capitalize on the very limited time in classroom, and in particularly time on tasks issue that we've seen in research that teachers had, and how to maximize opportunities to engage with text. And like I mentioned earlier on, all subject areas to a very large extent, there's some sort of reading or some sort of text engagement that needs to be done. But how do you capitalize on those opportunities during the very shortened or let me not say not enough reading time that our learners need? So I think in my view is that I think there's opportunities there to investigate possible interventions, models. Time on task is at least from research that we know is a serious issue. And particularly in your big classroom sizes and so on. So finding ways of how to get learners to be reading more, just like probably like Lionel Messi apparently spends 80% of his time on the soccer field just shooting at posts, not even like any other drills. He just spends most of his time shooting at posts. And similarly like to reading. How do you become a better reader? If you read, and if you read more.
Thank you, Nangamso. Gail, would you like to add to that at all? What are the untapped opportunities that you think could be addressed?
Untapped in terms of improving literacy. So I think what would really help with large classes and the fact that we're dealing with learning backlogs and increasing learning losses, I really think we should be thinking about teacher assistance in the foundation phase. That's really going to support the foundation phase teacher, because in those early grades, you need to work one-on-one and with smaller groups. And that for me is one issue. Another, and this opens a whole longer debate, so I'll just put it on the table, is thinking about our language policy. And I think to use one of Nick Spall's terms, binding constraints, is the fact that we make that switch in grade 4 to learning in English. And that's all your subject areas, hence the question about how do we look at reading across the curriculum. And I really think we need to be sitting and having a discussion about that.
Thank you, that is so important. Nonkobela, would you like to add to that? I see you look like you've gotten a thought.
No, I mean, I agree with everything that Gail said, yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so Nkosinashi says that he thinks it would be beneficial for organizations like Zenex to exchange best practice and research outcomes with corporates, especially the ones involved in literacy interventions. I know you do quite a bit in that space, Gail. Nonkobela, I wonder if you could speak to the best practice and research that you have drawn from as a corporate.
Best practice in terms of promoting literacy. Well, I mean, we work with the experts, right? That's why we partner with the experts. So we for teacher capability development and teacher instruction and teacher coaching, we use Fundawande, whom we believe right now are the experts. Well, yeah, and particularly in Xhosa Southern. And we've also partnered with Rhodes University. This is where the teachers, because they've got a course for teachers on the basics of literacy for our literacy ambassadors that we're working on, that we're working with. And then also the advanced literacy courses for the teachers and the HODs as well. So and then in terms of benchmark, I mean, we measure our learners every year. So we use the EGRA test to measure the 5 components, oral reading fluency and all of that, and leading up to comprehension. Every year, we measure and we test. We used to do samples, but now we're doing universal testing of all the learners from grade 1 up to grade 3. So we're using evidence to focus and to understand exactly where we're making progress, and then to analyze why we're not making progress and what interventions need to be put in place to support that. To Gail's point, we've also, I mean, for us, the interventions that we believe really need to be consolidated and sort of is the group guided reading, which is where we're seeing a lot of resilience, if I want to say that, from teachers. And which, is the one area that if we were to make the more progress on in terms of daily practice, we believe would really result in significant gains in literacy. And then the second one is this whole issue about teacher assistance in classrooms, particularly from grade R to grade 3. I mean, in all the good schools or in private sector schools, you find this is common cause. And yet in our school, and in those schools, I mean, the average class sizes is like 20, 25 or 28. And yet you always find that in the early grades, there's a teacher and a teaching assistant, or whatever it's called. And, in most public schools where you have, average class size of 40 or more, less resources, there's no teacher assistant. Then, teaching assistants are not part of the standard way of instructing children. So this is how we are trying to use our what we call our literacy ambassadors to support the teachers in the classroom as kind of teacher assistants, if you want. But I do believe that this should be rolled out universally in all schools and in all classrooms, and it shouldn't be a matter of choice, and we shouldn't have to be negotiating with teachers on whether to accept and how to accommodate these learner assistants. And they it should be part of the teachers' training, and they should understand the benefit of this. Sinangam so wants to add more.
Please go ahead.
Thanks. No, Nkobela, I just wanted to add on the teacher assistant conversation or topic, which is for us, because we do have a teacher assistant intervention in Limpopo, is that it's critical on that it is teacher assistant that is instructed to support learning and teaching. So we all know of the EAs that were and now have been sort of extended, sort of more generalist, and they had multiple tasks, from administrative to checking temperatures and whatever the case is. But the question here is, how do you effectively and efficiently make use of an unemployed youth in the classroom to support learning and teaching. So that's all I just wanted to add on to your point there, but I completely agree.
Thank you very much. So just to stay with the teacher development and support, Zephany asks Gail and Ngamso, recognizing teachers seem overwhelmed and just in an effort to help them catch up, how do you get them to buy into seeing the importance of literacy training? Gail, can we start with you possibly?
Yes, first of all, I want to agree with Zephany that teachers are overwhelmed. Overwhelmed also because we have the rotational system. So you're now not only planning as a teacher coming in, but you're planning for doubling up the work that you're doing and seeing if you can send work to parents, to respond. The approach has been not instructional training intervention. The approach has been largely around teachers discussing and learning from each other. Because this is where teachers can support each other. It's what we call communities of practice. The second way is actually going into the classroom with teachers and working with them on the content they're delivering at the time. I think it's less now about taking teachers away and doing a typical training session, but more being, for want of a better word, in the moment, supporting teachers with their immediate issues around teaching and learning.
I love that. It feels like authentically supportive rather than another thing to do. In fact, one of my first kind of exposure to Zenex was when you did a report back on the progress of your work with student teachers. And I remember being so moved by a story that a student teacher shared at your event, where she spoke about the fact that you had they were working in small groups, and the student teachers were reading to each other to experience what it felt like to be read to, because the reality is that so many of them didn't grow up in homes where they were read to, and then they become teachers who are meant to read. So that just acknowledgement of the challenges and the support around that feels really meaningful. Thank you. Ngamso, would you like to add to that in terms of the teacher buy-in?
Yeah. Just to also agree with Gail, sort of taking we're walking along with teachers on this journey approach. And from an implementation point of view, I think teacher buy-in is critical because teachers are the engines of the curriculum. They're the deliverers of our curriculum. So we invest a lot of time in relationships from bottom up and top down. And the intervention in Eastern Cape that I referred to earlier on, that we started in 2019, our head coach there, Zaza, will tell you, they've reached a point where they can say after 3 years they've got almost a good 95% buy-in. So also to acknowledge that buy-in takes time. And often our approach is that we meet the teacher where they are. Is also very critical. These are humans like us and have been in the classroom, and there's probably also a lot that we can learn from them. So it's not Fundawande imposing that this is the silver bullet, and therefore you just implement and run with it. But to acknowledge that these teachers they have their own agency. They're coming in with their own experience, their own views, or whatever the case is, and taking that and embracing that along the way. So, I mean, just to add that it does take time. We invest a lot in the relationships. And when I mean top down and bottom up, from system wide, and then obviously from community-based, school-based and so forth. And then also just emphasizing on the fact that in most cases, at least from our experience, that buy-in does take time. So I think those few things have worked in our favor, that we meet the teacher where they are, we walk along with them We're not pulling them, we walk right next to them. And yeah.
Thank you very much. I am going to now do a once around the call to ask you, with 4 minutes to go on the call, to ask you each to give one piece of advice to people working in the literacy space in terms of ensuring the greatest amount of impact through their programming, and also just being responsive to the kind of context that we're working in at the moment. The fact that literacy is such a core component for helping to kind of narrow the huge gap in the education system. So 1 minute each, no pressure. Can we start with Nonkobela? Shall we start with you?
Okay, great. Thanks, Anne. I mean, yeah, no doubt that, okay, I already said this and I'm going to say this again. For me, I really think we should, this country needs an even more overwhelming and concentrated effort on this area, because like I said, it's the key to success of so many other educational outcomes. So I'd like to see more focus on it from an, a government approach, and more partnership with private sector practitioners in this regard, who are generally a little bit more successful anyway. But with respect to the NGOs and all the many, because we get, as Volkswagen, I think people now know that we're, this is an area of focus for us. We get a lot of proposals from people on, there's so many people who are doing different things in terms of promoting literacy, whether it is resources, development, or methodologies. But so few of them have actually been tested, or that the impact thereof has been tested. So people come up with all these innovative and creative ideas that maybe are fun for the children to do and are fun activities. But in terms of actual demonstrated impact, there's much less work that's done there, and much less focus, which I think is part of the problem, is that there's so much that's been done, but is it really leading to children being able to read and write for meaning? Because that is ultimately the goal. And we really need to stay focused on this goal. Whatever we're doing, we must be able to say, if these are the, the 5 key components of literacy are the following, and this particular game or this activity will impact on, phonetics or phonemic awareness or oral reading fluency, and we can measure it in this way and that way. That is what's important. So that's my, my big, I don't want to say frustration, but it's always a challenge with all the players in the space is, what is the evidence that your initiative or it really does work and will lead to success. So that's what I'd like to see more of, and maybe fewer things, but just doing the right things for everybody.
Absolutely. And just to pull back to Gail, also just what Gail mentioned earlier in terms of funders also recognizing the need to support that kind of testing, monitoring and evaluation. Gail, can I ask for your closing piece of advice or comment?
Given where I'm come, the context that I work in, I'm going to speak with the funder hat to funders in the audience. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of learning. And it's being part of webinars like this, attending conferences, and being part of the broader literacy ecosystem. The interventions, the research, the conferences, the seminars. And coupled with that learning is to commit to doing monitoring and evaluation, because we all contribute to building that body of evidence. The second is we have to partner. And I'm not only talking about pooling our funds, but seeing nonprofits as our partners and actually getting involved in co-creation and co-design. I think we're very fortunate in South Africa to have the number of NPOs that we have working in literacy. And then lastly, it's a long journey. I think strategically we have to commit ourselves to knowing that we have to stay with this for a number of years to see our successes.
Thank you so much, Gail. And Ngamso, your closing comments, please.
Cool. So the fortunate thing is I think both Nkqubela and Gail touched on my points. I'll be very brief. And the only thing that I would add there from, in particular at an NGO level, is that you know, less than I think 1.4% of philanthropy money gets used in education. We talk about at Fundawande what is the best use of that philanthropic funding is to influence government on how they spend their funds. So I think in a sense of touching on Gail's point is that I think now is the time, as a country, we need to be focused. We need to be streamlined. I see a lot of duplications in the NGO spaces and so forth. We need to be coming together. If we want to go far, we go together. And I think streamlining these partnerships, collaborations, and not reinventing the wheel will save us a whole lot of time and resources, and probably we can reach our goal a lot more faster. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. We're officially over time, which I think only speaks to the importance of the topic, how much needs to be unpacked. But we do thank you all so much for your time. I want to once again thank Volkswagen South Africa, not only for their commitment to driving literacy in our society, but also for their support of this conversation today. Gail, Ngamso, Nkqubela, thank you so much for your insight. We will be sharing the recording and the summary notes with all delegates early next week. And please stay on the call to complete the survey before you leave us. Thank you all so much. Go well, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, Zaya.
Thank you.